All right, back with yet another mock draft here. This time I am doing the what I would do within reason. I think a good way to view it is what I would hope for happens if I was a fan of each team. So these are the players that I think every pick I'm going to make is one I could realistically see happening, but it's what I would do, not what the NFL does, because what I tend to how I evaluate the players sometimes tends to deviate from how the NFL evaluates players. So yeah, let's just get into it. Starting off here, we're going to start off with the Panthers, and again, I have CJ Stroud as my number one prospect. I think they could draft him. I think a lot of teams would draft Bryce Young. Bryce Young is what people think is going to happen. I wouldn't be mad at that if I was a Panthers fan, but I think I would prefer CJ Stroud, so that's my pick. And then the Texans, I think definitely Bryce Young. Then those two are, to me, far above anyone else on the board. Now we get to what's a really difficult one for me to pick, quite frankly, because Jalen Carter is my number three prospect. I do think drafting him here is fine. The issue, of course, is the off the field concerns, which I just don't know how much to take into that because I haven't done the evaluation. But if I'm a Cardinals fan, I'm hoping they did the evaluation, feel comfortable with taking him, and do take him. And so I would say that I hope, if I'm a Cardinals fan, they do end up taking Carter. And then for the Colts, I think I would hope that they take Richardson because of his upside and because he could be an elite quarterback. There's obviously the downside, but that's kind of how I would view it. I think for the Seahawks, there's no chance that if Will Anderson is here at 5, they take anyone else. I think that that's just, I don't even get a pick here because that's what they would do. I think that that would be very surprising if they go elsewhere. Now we have the Lions. The Lions are in an interesting spot where who could they realistically go after? I think they probably are going to look at corner with Devin Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez. I think that's probably where they'll pay the most attention to. And I think that they'll go after, I would hope for Witherspoon here. He is the next highest player on my big board. So that's what I would hope for. So then we have the Raiders, who, again, could go after quarterback, could go after Will Levis, but I'm not a huge Will Levis fan. So I personally wouldn't necessarily be rooting for a Will Levis situation. I think I'd probably maybe root more for like a Peter Skoronsky. I don't think that's necessarily crazy to suggest. Now, listen, they don't need a left tackle. That's just not a need for them. So, who's going to, this where things get a little bit weird. But I don't know. I think currently is Jermaine Illuminor going to repeat his good season from last year? I don't know if I would bank on that too much. And if he does, okay, well, you can figure out someone to play at the guard position. They could use some offensive line help, I think. So while their offensive line isn't the disaster it's been in years past, at least on paper, I'd like to have another guy in the room. So I'm going to go with Skoronsky as what I would root for because I think he's a better player than some of the other guys they might end up selecting. Number 8, you have the Falcons, who, again, could go Will Levis here. I could definitely see that. But what would I be hoping they do? I think I would be hoping, me personally, just me, Jackson, what would I be hoping for? I'd hope for Quentin Johnson. He's someone who I like a lot as a player. I think he's a great wide receiver, would fit that Arthur Smith scheme well. I compared him to A.J. Brown. So, yeah, there you go. Him with Drake London and Kyle Pitts. This could potentially be an awesome receiving core for who knows what quarterback. But to me, Will Levis isn't worth the number 8 overall pick. So don't go chasing there. That's how I view it. Next up is the Chicago Bears, who is this an insane is this something that could never happen? Kalijah Cansey, I like him a lot as a player. I do have him as a top 5 talent on my big board. I think that his pass rushing is insane. And I don't think it's crazy that they draft him. They probably would want a defensive lineman, an interior defensive lineman. And with Carter off the board, again, maybe it wouldn't happen. Maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic there, but that's what I would hope for there. For the Eagles, I think I would go Brian Branch, a guy who I could see potentially getting drafted there, although I think most people consider this a bit of a reach, but I don't think it's crazy enough that I think it could realistically happen. As for the Titans are definitely in an interesting spot. They could go receiver, they could go offensive lineman. Those are their 2 biggest needs. So how about Jackson Smith and Jigba? It'd be exciting. He's not the next guy on my board, but I don't think they would draft anyone who I have higher up on my board. So that's where I would go. And then for the Texans, I do think the Texans are really going to want a weapon to help out Bryce Young. I think that's how they're viewing it. So if that is what they do and they say, we're just getting a weapon with this pick, and if it's a reach, it's a reach, then the weapon I would want would be Zay Flowers. So that's where I'm going to go with there. And then for the For the Jets, I think they're going to go Paris Johnson. I just think that's what's going to happen. They're going to pick the best tackle available. He's the best tackle available. As for the Patriots picking at 14, I think most Patriots fans are simply just hoping that they don't select a offensive lineman who's projected to go in round 3. That's really what they're going to hope for. They're going to trade down. You know what? They always trade down. That's what they do. But who would they? Who would I want them to pick if I'm a Patriots fan? Probably Deontay Banks. Feels reasonable. They could select him here. I think he's a really good corner and would fit that scheme very well. We didn't have the Packers next up on this list, who they're going to hope for a receiver, but there isn't a great receiver here at 15. So how about a guy who can still catch the football, a pass catcher, Dalton Kincaid here, who could be very good in that role. Then for Washington, again, I don't love. I just Washington's in a weird spot where I just don't love where they're at. And you know what? I didn't do this in a previous mock draft, but I kind of like this now that I think about it. What about Will Levis at 16? Now, listen, I don't love Will Levis, but a lot of people do. And getting him this late, I think they would feel pretty comfortable about. So that's where I would draft him here. Again, would he fall this far? No. It's just because of a unique mock draft I'm doing that he fell this far. Like same thing for Tyree Wilson, who's next on the consensus big board, next on the PFF big board. But that's just how I view it. Again, Steelers next up on this list. Who would I hope that they draft if I am a Pittsburgh Steelers fan? There's a couple of players who I'm still intrigued by. Christian Gonzalez, I think I made a mistake there. I meant to draft. I forgot that he was still on the board. I would have had him go. So I'll have Christian Gonzalez go here. But really, I didn't realize he was still on the board. That's my bad. I would have had him go to the Patriots and then Banks there. So we'll put that on the official thing. The issue with doing this live to tape is that sometimes happens. My bad. But anyways, moving on, the Detroit Lions here at number 18. Detroit Lions, who have selected Devin Witherspoon, so they've added an extra corner at this point. Where do they want to go from here is an interesting question. I kind of think they're going to go after Tyree Wilson. If he's still on the board. Listen, a bit of a reach for me. I'm not as crazy on Tyree Wilson as others, but you know what? I still like him a lot, and I still think there's a lot of value there. And if it doesn't work out, you don't desperately need him to work out year one. So why not there? Now for Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're in a bit of a tough spot. These Buccaneers are, I think. If I am a Buccaneers fan, so this isn't a hypothetical. If I'm here, this is the board. Who do I hope that they select? Really, I kind of hope that they just get the best player available on the big board, but I don't know if they would get the best player available on my big board because I have a couple guys who are going to go lower that I have higher. So I'll just go Nolan Smith. I think he could work in that scheme. I think his speed his athleticism could work well in a Todd Bowles system. So I'll select him there. Now we have the Seahawks, who again, early on, they drafted Will Anderson, so they have an edge rusher. So they feel okay there. But why not still help out the defensive line? How about Brian Bresee, however you want to say it? Add him to the roster, who could potentially be someone who could, again, just help out that defense. And they definitely could use some defensive help. Then we have the Chargers, who, if I'm a Chargers fan, I'm pounding table. Let's get a third option. Let's get someone who can really, be the guy who can work over the middle. I think Michael Mayer could be that guy. You could also go Jordan Addison, but to me, I think the better player on the board. Give me Michael Mayer. And then for the Ravens, this is where things get very interesting because I think they could go after one of these cornerbacks, that are very interesting. But if Joey Porter Jr. is on the board, they're drafting Joey Porter Jr. So that's where I'm going to go for what I would want to have happen realistically. The Vikings are next up on this list. Vikings have plenty of needs that they could fill right on the big board. Realistically, what would they do? Are they just rushing in the pick to get Lucas Van Ness? I don't know if they're necessarily doing that, but they're probably doing that. So I think I'm just going to select him and call it a day. The Jaguars are another interesting team. I think they could go after edge. I don't think that's a crazy take because, again, yes, they have a really good edge rusher and an edge rusher they spent the first overall pick on. But I think that they could use like a Myles Murphy who could also play 500 snaps. And if Walker doesn't take that next step in his second season, well, then you have a backup plan here. So that's what I like about them going edge. Because again, You use more than two edge rushers in a season. Just because there's only two on a play doesn't mean you only use two. That's not how it works. Next up for the Giants, out of the guys they would consider, I think Jordan Addison would be the one I prefer the most. I have him as a high second round grade. A lot of people have him as a first rounder, but keep in mind, I also don't have 31 first round grades this draft. I think it's kind of a weaker draft. So yeah. As for pick 26 with the Cowboys, the reality is, I think the Cowboys, there is no what I would hope for to realistically happen, because there's only one thing that's realistically happening. If Bijan Robinson is available at 26, they're picking him. It's the Cowboys. They would love an Ezekiel Elliott replacement. I think they would go after Bijan if given the opportunity. So, regardless of what I would want to happen, it's what I would want to happen that realistically could happen. And there's only one thing I see that could realistically happen here. Next up for the Bills, how about Emmanuel Forbes, a guy who I love? And again, it's what I would want if I was a Bills fan. I think he could be great in my what I would do mock draft. I had him going much earlier, so yeah, there you go. Pick 28, we have the Cincinnati Bengals here, who again, interesting. They're kind of in a good spot where there's several ways they could take this. I don't think they have to go one way or the other. I do think they could use some help on the offensive line. I think they could, and I think maybe a guy who I would like them to draft would be Broderick Jones. I think it's possible they do that as well. I don't think that's crazy that they make that decision. And then for New Orleans Saints, I do think they go offensive line as well, but maybe they go interior offensive line, get Osiris Torrance here, who's a player I like a lot. As for the Eagles, who again at pick 10, I had them selecting Brian Branch. So they have a safety now at this point. So where else do they want to go with? Not a great receiver who is on the board at this point. They could go interior offensive lineman, and I'll have them going Mazzie Smith, a guy who I like a lot. Could make it really hard to run the ball on them if they added him. Because they already have plenty of talent on that defensive line. Finally, the Kansas City Chiefs here, who I think they could use a tackle. And I'll say maybe to go DeJuan Jones and say, hey, he's the guy who can play right tackle the way we want. So we'll go with that. So, okay, that is my mock draft of what I would want to happen if I'm a fan of each team that realistically could happen. That is my mock draft. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.